I can start. So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. It is a beautiful sunny day here in Brussels, like a great day to kickstart the third edition of European Green Infrastructure Day. Wow, we are already at the third edition. Seems like yesterday when we launched this, the first edition of this incredible event. Which is very exciting. Is a great moment to discuss about greening our cities, transforming the built environment, integrating vegetation in urban areas. Today we have a very long and interesting day with 4 sessions dealing with where we will touch upon different topics. We will have this now session 1 starting at 10. Session 2 at 11:15, session 3 after lunch at 2 o'clock, and session 4 at 3:15, before concluding remarks from our president, Professor Manfred Kohler, at 4:15. Let me just start perhaps from the end with thanking my colleagues Santa, Antonin, Esther, Matteo for helping me to organize this event, and also now I think in total 23 speakers and moderators that have accepted our invitation to join to participate to this discussion. I'll leave the floor to my colleague Mariangela Fabbri, then to moderate session 1. Thank you, Mariangela. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luigi. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. My name is Mariangela Fabbri. I'm head of research at the Buildings Performance Institute of Europe. Some of you may know us as BPIE. It's shorter and easier to remember. I will be moderating this first session. Before starting doing this, just a couple of instructions and an explanation on how the session will go. We have four speakers. Each of one will give we'll have a short intervention, and then we will open the session for a Q&A. Please write your questions in the Q&A function, not in the chat, because I will be monitoring the Q&A, so all your questions have to go through there. Just a reminder also that the meeting is recorded and is also live on YouTube for those who are following there. Good morning. Now, let me just introduce the topic of this first panel and the speakers. This first session is about green, efficient, and solar powered, the key features of a sustainable building stock. And we have 4 great speakers. We have MEP Kieran Cuffe, who just joined us. Good morning. He's the rapporteur for the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive recast. And we know he's been very busy on this, and so we'll hear from him how it's going on. We have Dustin Getch, who is urban diversity professional from the European Federation of Green Roofs and Walls. Good morning. Johan Ozenberg, policy advisor for Solar Power Europe. And as our last speaker, Luigi Petito, the head of the Secretariat, that just welcomed all of us this morning. So the head of the European chapter of the Secretariat, the World Green Infrastructure Network. So with that, I welcome you again, and I give the floor to Kieran. Kieran, please. Good morning and welcome, and share your thoughts with us. As I explained before, I don't know if you joined just before or after I just said it. I will let every speaker speak and keep the Q&A until the end. Everyone has 5 minutes, but if you have to leave earlier, just let me know and we'll just ask you a couple of questions before that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Hopefully I can stay with you for most of the next hour. And it's a real pleasure to join you this morning. And as you say, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is an important file in both decarbonising our buildings, but also in encouraging the transition to low carbon technologies and to improving our towns and cities and buildings for a greener future. And of course, we have the research on the contribution of green roofs, the contribution of photovoltaics, and we know what can be achieved. I mean, green roofs and walls can highly contribute to cutting CO2 emissions and the energy consumption of buildings across the Union, and it can support the goal of a decarbonised and efficient EU building stock by 2050. I would like to have gone further with the provisions on green infrastructure, but unfortunately, there was not enough support for this within the Parliament. But there is now a requirement in Article 7 of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive for new buildings to address climate through solutions like green infrastructure. And it's also important to remember that we're going through a biodiversity crisis, and green roofs and walls can make a substantial contribution to biodiversity, particularly thick green roofs that allow sufficient planting on top. And this can provide a habitat for various species, such as pollinators, while mitigating the effects of climate change, such as the urban heat island effect, thereby improving the resilience of our cities. And to talk about the urban heat island, 3 weeks ago, I remember meeting colleagues from Valencia. They said in March, it's already over 30 degrees in Valencia. And just in the headlines this morning, I see we hit 40 degrees on the Iberian Peninsula in the last few days. So the urban heat island effect is real, and it's not just 3 months of the year. It will be in the future 6 months of the year, if not longer. So we have to improve the resilience of our cities. We have to take steps to address this. There's a lot more I would have liked to do within this directive, but unfortunately it was out of scope. Not just the green infrastructure, but the blue infrastructure as well. The capacity of our urban areas to address sustainable urban drainage, not just to tackle the CO2 in use of our buildings, but to really drill down into what buildings can do, in what we can do with the urban regeneration of our buildings, because we know that the most sustainable building is the building we already have. But look, I've spoken too long. I'm happy to take questions on this later on, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers.
Thank you very much, Kieran. I already noted a couple of questions that your short speech triggered. Now to our next speaker, Dusty Gedge, urban biodiversity professional from the European Federation of Green Roofs and Walls. Dusty, I hear you have a presentation that you like, or a slide that you would like to share. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll share, towards the end of what I'm talking about, I'll share the images because they tell a story. I'd like to thank Kieran actually, because he mentioned biodiversity, which is my interest, but over the 25 years that I've been involved in green roofs, I've had to deal with a lot of projects and thinking about how you can combine those two processes, which is the solar and the green roof. And in fact, what I'd like to try and get through to the audience today is that actually green roofs can help solar panels become more efficient, and solar panels can actually increase the biodiversity of a green roof. And this has been well documented in Switzerland and also in the United Kingdom. And I'm also would like to, towards the very end of my 5 minutes, talk about innovation, because there's some very interesting innovation, particularly coming out of Sweden and Norway. But generally in my work, we have solar energy people, we have green roof and biodiversity people, and sometimes, as is normal across this agenda, there's a kind of sometimes a silo thinking. And one of the interesting things about the green roof industry is obviously when the solar industry really started to blossom in Germany, which is the center of the green roof industry in Europe, is the industry developed processes to integrate the solar mounting into the green roof. So the green roof, for anybody who's technical there, becomes the ballasting mechanism. And as Kieran referred, the deeper the substrate, the better it is for biodiversity. The deeper the substrate, the better it is for stormwater. The deeper the substrate, more evapotranspiration and more cooling of solar panels in terms of the microclimate around the panel. And essentially way back in the late 1990s, I think it was in Karlsruhe in Germany, they recognized that a green roof can increase the efficiency of a solar panel by about 3%, which is a good thing. And also when I get to the innovation in Switzerland is they're using a process which uses a white substrate, and also in Switzerland, it snows a lot, and they're using vertical panels which actually produce up to 10% more efficiency because of the reflected light from snow and the white substrate. And what I want to convince people here is it's not a case of one or the other, or you put one on the other. You try to combine those in an intelligent way to deliver for the nature restoration strategy, the energy strategy, and the blue strategy, which Kieran referred to. And I would like to also end this, because I'm just going to quickly end this, is that there is potential for a lot of innovation in Europe in this field, because we actually lead this field in terms of how this is delivered using green roofs and solar together to deliver across the agenda. And I just want to finish up, if I may, very quickly sharing 3 slides to give you some visual stimulation about this subject. It's not working, I'm afraid. So I'm afraid it's not working because I had a computer collapse last week and I haven't got Zoom installed. So, but what I was going to show you is a very conventional green roof with solar panels, then a green roof, which is referred to as a biosolar roof. It delivers for renewable energy and biodiversity, not generic biodiversity. And if you could Google, if you're listening, bifacial solar panels, Switzerland, you will see this really innovative approach that is coming out of Switzerland. It's also coming out of Norway. It's not just the Swiss, which I think is the solution for the future, because 100% of the green roof is visible. It is visible to the light and not covered by panels because they're vertical. I'm going to do a video about this, which I share with the World Green Infrastructure Network, which viewers might like to have. Thank you very much for inviting me and listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jan Ozenberg, Policy Advisor of the Solar Power Europe. What is your view on?
Yes, hello, Mariangela, and hello to all the other participants. In fact, only when I prepared for this session, I realized how amazing green roofs actually are. And then I had a conversation with a mounting structure company, which also does green roofs, to dive a little bit deeper into what this actually means. So today we have around 10% of EU buildings that are equipped with solar technology. We have frontrunners like the Netherlands, where already 25% of the buildings are equipped. And just from the general market growth, we expect that by 2030, around 30% of the buildings in Europe will be equipped with solar. However, the majority of these installations today is on buildings in rural areas and on standalone buildings. And these, as you will know, are not the primary target for green roofs. Green roofs unfold most of their potential in cities in cities. And in cities, you generally have the problem that renters or several parties within one buildings have to agree on installing a solar panel, which really slows down the development. Now, complementing to what Dusty has just said, we really agree that this is not a conflict between the two, let's call them technologies or solutions. For example, we see that in France, the solar standard there requires that either you have a green roof or a solar panel. But we really see we have two crises. We have an environmental crisis and the problem of climate change. And in fact, we really believe that green roofs and solar do work together with each other. And let me just quickly share two examples of how they can work. These are on the right. You should see the vertical solar panels that also Dusty referred to. They are from Norway. And they, as you see, have the full light coming to the ground, feeding the plants. And then you also have like traditional mounting structures here, which are around 30 centimeters above the ground, so that the plants can flourish a little bit more. These are solutions that are becoming more and more present. And to go a little bit more into the details, so solar works very well both on extensive and on intensive green roofs. You have systems that are either mounted 5 centimeters above the ground or larger, 30 centimeters above the ground. And especially in the systems that are mounted with a higher distance from the ground, you get a more distributed growth of the plants underneath. The seeds spread further. And it's not only in front of the panel that the plants grow. Of course, we must consider that there's some maintenance required, so you have to increase the distance between the panels, which leads to lower amount of kilowatt, a lower capacity installed on these buildings. So I think that's on the technical side, and on where the market is developing, we see a very strong impact of solar standards. So as they are planned in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, meaning that every building must be equipped with solar panels, see a strong impact of laws like this on green roof development, because suddenly owners of a green roof will start to think about also adding a solar panel to their green roof. And for example, in Baden-Württemberg, this is already showing some effect, where we see really a strong increase of green roofs in combination with solar panels.
Thank you, Jan. Luigi, this is our last intervention before I start firing my questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mariangela. Thank you, Jan, Dusty, and Kirian for joining us, for your intervention. Very interesting ideas. Mariangela, I'll try to be short so that we can have a bit of debate and the discussion after. The point I want to make here is rather simple. I would like to underline that this agenda is happening. So this is my message. Kirian, with the energy performance, I mean, from a policy perspective, because my job here is I'm a lobbyist. I've been pushing to advance this agenda of greening cities for now since a few years. I think the work that Kirian has put into the Energy Performance of Building Directive as far as the green infrastructure are concerned is amazing. Kirian, I know that you try to push, and we've been working on this since the report preceding the EPBD, and including some elements into the policy debate. But I think expanding the scope of the directive to include nature-based solution, including requirements, as you said, for new and building undergoing major renovation to consider, to work, to provide, to address climate adaptation inter alia through green infrastructure, including, like, very important, a definition of the multiple benefits of green infrastructure into such an important and relevant piece of legislation. I think this is amazing. We couldn't imagine to get this before, and I hope that we will be able all together, and I see here alignment among stakeholders to keep this through this complex discussions and process that you will have to go through. We will have to go through, because I think this is important with the member states and with the concerns for several aspects, Kirian. But in general, what is in there is really powerful. The second point is what is going on with the nature restoration law. In the nature restoration law, the European Union proposed first ever, first of its kind, a mandatory target for greening cities, for greening urban areas. this is something amazing. We have so by 2030 the Commission proposes to have no loss by 2030, increase of greening spaces by 2040, 3% by 2040, 5% by 2050, including ensuring that this increase in green spaces is happening in relation to the built environment, in relation to building. So there is the concept of integrating vegetation in the built environment. Kilian, this is a wonderful hook. This is another super important piece of legislation that indicates the path. Okay, there is a direction. The third super important regulatory file that is under the revision and is pushing de facto this agenda is the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. You all know we have a directive that was 32 years old and is now under revision. A directive that, because it was so old, didn't include at all concepts such as stormwater overflow or runoff. Probably 32 years ago, we had cities and urban areas didn't have to address these issues. But now we are confronted. Cities are confronted to this problem, and we have a directive that invites member states and local authorities to develop integrated urban wastewater treatment plan. And in this plan, the priority needs to be given to solutions, to green solution over gray solution. So again, there's no specific reference to green roof in the directive, but the concept, Kilian, you mentioned before, of decentralized stormwater management or sustainable water management is there, and we need to keep it through the difficult revision of this directive. It is not finished here. We had the revision of pollinator initiative. So we have other policy guidance and guidelines produced by the European Commission for local authorities, which are not mandatory, but invite cities, local authorities to look into increased biodiversity and make cities more permeable and help cities to bring out the loss of biodiversity, which is possibly the crisis of all the crises. I mean, we are living very different times. And then we have some other, let's call it more soft, but very important files. Bauhaus initiative. So all the elements related to which are not we have not a regulatory power, if you want, but still promote the development of green infrastructure, of green spaces in cities, because of also their capacity to make our cities more inclusive, to create space for recreation. You know, de facto, to use billions of square meters that are on top of our buildings to transform our cities, to make our cities healthier, greener, wealthier as well, and make the citizens happy. So I'd like to conclude this short intervention, Mariangela, by saying I also see all this. So from a policy perspective, this is going on. This is happening. I mean, we have broken the silo approach. There is this holistic process that is going on, but also people is interested. I mean, yesterday I was at the Eurocities European conference in Ghent. There were 70, 80 with Dusty, actually. We were there together discussing biosolar installation. There were 70, 80 cities from across Europe interested, and we had a lovely debate. There were questions about this. 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was in Poland to discuss in front of 150 architects, designer, and we were discussing legislation initiative that are popping up everywhere, also in Poland, to push this to advance this agenda. So I think if we get it right, especially with bringing to land some of the important pieces of legislation that are on the table, we can really do something transforming our cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi, and thank you, everyone. Now we open our Q&A session. As a reminder to the participant, please write your questions into the Q&A. I will follow and keep track of it and ask your questions to our speakers. I will start with a few questions on my own while our audience think about theirs. And my first question is for Kieran, is related to many things that all the speakers mentioned. And yourself, you mentioned the benefits of green roofs and walls to adapt cities to climate change impacts, and how you would have liked the BPIE directive to go beyond. What are other solutions that you see and would support the objective of climate adaptation and make cities more resilient? And if not in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, could we find other avenues, maybe some of those that Luigi has mentioned, where this could happen?
It's a really good question, and I think Luigi touched on two legislative issues: the urban wastewater treatment directive, and then the strategy, the new European Bauhaus strategy, which is not a legislative file, but which actually I think does have an influence over at a high level over European investment. I think it's worthwhile looking at almost any European Union file and teasing out the impact that file can have on our towns and cities. I mean, I think the European Commission has traditionally been reluctant to engage with urban policy because it likes to engage at a member state level. But I think even within DG Regio, there is an interest in cities. And I know I sit on the Energy Committee of the Parliament, and I sit on the Transport Committee of the Parliament. And many of these files have a potential impact on cities. For instance, the file on the trans-European transport networks, there's a focus on urban nodes, and there's a focus on ensuring that that active mobility is facilitated, in other words, walking and cycling. And there's real potential there to look at transport and mobility and encourage the green modes of transport. So I would say we should be looking at all of these different files, the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and look at the scope for the decarbonisation of our neighbourhoods, of our cities, and the role for green and indeed blue infrastructure in facilitating this. And also the circular economy approach at a European level, which has, as Luigi said, it references sustainable urban drainage, treating wastewater, treating even rainwater on site to stop flooding by retaining water on deep green roofs, but in cleaning water through swales and through drainage channels that have vegetation that naturally purify that water before it goes into a concrete pipe. So I would advocate that we should look at all legislative files, and within many of them, if not most of them, there is potential to push green infrastructure, to push nature-based solutions. And these high-level strategies around the circular economy are really bringing ideas that were quite niche into the mainstream. I mean, the work, the cradle-to-cradle approach from Braungart and McDonough, which I read 10, 15, 20 years ago, suddenly these kind of documents are finding their way into Berlaymont. They're finding their way into the centers of decision-making in Brussels. And I certainly think, while perhaps it's not an open door, there certainly is a willingness to look at these kind of solutions. So I really think we should push at that door and make sure it is fully open. And I think the environment can gain, but also the economy can gain, and there are social benefits as well.
Thank you. I have a question for Dusty. You mentioned that there is still silo thinking between the green roof industry and the solar industry in certain instances and in certain places. What do you see as the major barriers or the obstacles for the implementation of these solutions as for overcoming these barriers? Because it seems from what I hear that on one hand there are some difficulties, but there is a lot going on the ground. There's a lot of things that are happening that could be an excellent case to be brought to the attention also of the policymakers to maybe help overcoming some of this silo thinking.
I just want to, because I enjoyed what Jan showed. I don't think there's any silo thinking between the solar industry and the green roof industry. I think there is, when you get down to a development scale, the professional consultants are often siloed about what they're trying to do. And Jan made the point that if you're going to have a good green roof with solar panels on it, you know, if the solar energy guy wants to maximize the energy, you can't really have a good green roof. So there's a compromise there. And that's more in the professional consultancy class. But the point that you make there, and I understand how the Commission works, and I understand how the EU works, because I sat on the working group for ecosystem services and nature-based solutions, you know, way back when. But my experience in my own city, which is London, is when you make high-level London strategic policy, that starts to filter down to the districts, and that then starts to get the consultants having to come out of the silos and think in a more constructive way. And so I'm very positive and proactive about that, but it really is generally always policy-led, down to what is actually written in planning permissions, as we say in England, at a district level. And I think there is a lot of transition going on that we need to combine these technologies, and I think it has to be led from you know, the planning system, which is led from the policy system, would be my view.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and I'll start with the last one I received, because I think it might be relevant, and you and Jan might be able to answer this. Daniel Pakura writes, there seems to be a tendency towards promoting green roofs that needs thick substrates. What about buildings and structure that cannot structurally withstand that? Is there any interest for greening solutions that can thrive on thin substrates? Can any of you answer this question?
Well, I mean, you know, deep and shallow is an issue, but you know, if you go to most cities most countries where we have a good code of practice, is, you know, a thin system which is 20 millimeters is not fit for purpose. It's as simple as that. And there's lots of those systems going up. In the UK, it's 60 mil minimum. In Germany now it's 80 mil. In some cities it's 100 millimeters. In my context, and in an extensive green roofs, which is where a lot of the solar will go on, is really we need 100 to 150 millimeters. That is a good depth. Now, I don't want to take up too much time here, but if you're retrofitting, that's when you're in an issue of, if you've got a 100 kg roof, perhaps it's better off just to have solar panels on it than a green roof because of the statics. Now, it is possible to do a green roof with solar panels on 100 kgs, but really you need 120 kgs. But this is detail, but I'm sure Jan may want to compliment or disagree. I just, you know, it's a shared space, this is.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know about the impact of green roofs, but what we hear is that there's a problem for solar deployment in general, because a lot of the buildings need renovation to carry the solar panel. There are numbers going around that say that 60% of the flat roofs and flat industrial roofs in Europe need a renovation to carry solar panels. I mean, it can be a small renovation or a big renovation. But when you have a stable roof, then you can do both. So when you have a roof that can carry the green part, then it can also carry the solar panel. So here we also have a synergy between the three solutions. One is the energy efficiency of the building, then the green, the environmental benefit, and then the solar panel. You have to bring them together.
I have a follow-up question on this, Jan, to you, because you seem to support. You clearly said the two can go hand in hand. How does the solar industry envisage the combination of green roofs with solar powers? As far as in practice, who advises the building owners or the manager that has to decide how to lay this down when the building is renovated or built, and make sure that both are installed together in the best possible way for that specific building? And Dusty, if you want to follow up, I will give you the floor.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting question. So I mean, we're mostly talking about cities here, as far as I understand. You have a lot of residential residential buildings in cities, but also commercial buildings. I understand that many of the residential buildings are actually owned by commercial property owners who actually have the capacity to invest in consultants and to also use consultants for this. But indeed, there's not really an awareness for these dual solutions neither among the citizens nor among the consultants that Dusty mentioned. So there's really a need for either awareness raising or policy-driven solutions. For example, what we see in Munich is that flat roofs in residential areas with a certain square meter roof space have to be equipped with green roofs. And I believe that for solutions that don't bring a direct financial benefit, these policy-driven solutions are actually necessary. For the solar installation itself, you can always argue that the citizens will want to make money from it. But with the green roof, which has a very indirect and more subtle effect, you have the citizens who have the, let's say, the psychological space and also the monetary freedom to invest in these solutions. But you have a lot of people who don't have this let's say, margin on room for action. And here you actually need dedicated policies or dedicated solutions to target them.
Thank you. Darcy, you want to complement that?
Yeah, I hope Jan doesn't not like this, because it might not be. You were asking specifically who you go to. Well, I get involved in a lot of retrofit projects now, and Jan's quite right. A lot of the big corporates are looking to retrofit solar panels. I've told several of my big companies, big financial institutions, said, go to the green roof contractor first. Go to the green roof contractor first. And what happens, and I think, Jan, I hope you take this in the right way, is generally that people go, oh, the solar panels, it's sexy, it's sophisticated. We go to the solar guys because they know what they're doing. But if you're going to retrofit it into a green roof, or you want it with a green roof, it's better led by the green roof industry because they have modeling processes for wind loading and so. They understand the distance slightly better between the panels. But it's because solar's seen as, dare I say it, sexy, they must be the really sophisticated people. And it's a very sophisticated process. But when you get to implementation, it's really got to be led by the green roof industry. And honestly, it's my experience over 15 years. And I hope, Jan, you don't mind me saying that, because I feel,
No, I can perfectly well see this.
Thank you both. One of a member of our audience, Christoph Tippmann, has a question, and maybe Luigi, you know the answer to that. How are innovative green tech startups supported by the EU or sustainability funds or similar initiatives? Do you Do you have an answer to this question, or you, or maybe Kieran also has some ideas of how that could be done?
Thank you, Mariangela. It is a good question that, in my view, is linked to also to some of the discussion that we are having here on who can advise, and to a certain extent, where are the skills to do these things and so on. I mean, I want to go back to probably to some of the things I said in my first intervention. We need regulatory policy framework, and the European Union has a big role to play in this respect. We need to get this. We need to land the EPBD with those provisions that are in the EPBD. We need to work on the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, Nature Restoration Law, and so on. We need to create certainty. We need to bring this discussion at another level, because green roofs are there, have been around for 4 decades. I mean, we have thousands of evidence, scientific articles about all the benefits of green infrastructure. But it didn't happen because it is perceived as a nice to have. It is not an issue of solar and green or other things can go together. They must go together because they deliver benefits, and because we have to address crisis. There's no other way of thinking. If the sorry, it's a quite long point that I want to make here. But if we create the framework, the regulatory framework, and if we know that this is the direction where you go, then industry, local authorities, member states, experts, skills, then they start to come together, including, and I think I come to the question from the colleague, from participants, including finance and support for public, and that can leverage private investments. The point is, I already have seen in some work that I've done on cohesion policy, for example, before Kieran mentioned Regio, I already see in some operational programs, in some documents of the European Commission, some references to make cities, to restore the natural water cycle in cities, make city permeable. But this is all part of this discussion, of this agenda that is shaping, that we are shaping here together. So, and that is money, that is funds, that is financing also for startup, for research. I've already seen in Horizon 2020, I see more and more calls concerning greening infrastructure, greening cities, new technique, new methods, new methodology, and so on. I mean, to cut a long story short, I think it is super important that the European lawmaker define an enabling framework to advance, to go and is convinced, so that everyone can invest into this agenda in the next years, decades. I think this is not something that we will do in the short time, but we need to start from somewhere at one point.
Thank you. Follow up to Kieran. Yes, you want to intervene?
Yeah, I was going to.
For you, so go ahead.
I was going to agree with everything that Luigi said there. I mean, the Horizon program is Europeans' huge investment in research and indeed startups. So Horizon is a very good first port of call on this. But there is also a lot happening with the new European Bauhaus. There is a recognition of innovation and excellence. So if you simply Google New European Bauhaus, you'll find out more information about that. And then just in terms of green startups, there is a website, mygreenstartup.eu, which is a focal point for some information about green initiatives and startups. So there is quite a bit going on at an EU level, but then obviously at a member state level, at a country level, there's a lot of European funding used to encourage green innovation within those countries, and within wherever you live, you can find more information out about that.
Thank you. Yes, Luigi, you have a direct follow-up to that? And
No, Mariangela, no, if I can, I wanted to say a couple of thoughts about something before. I think one of the colleagues mentioned a direct or indirect economic benefits of, and I wanted to say something on this because there are direct economic benefits from green roof. I want to use another example, which is also an example of mainstreaming, Kirian, very important also for some discussions that needs to be within trialogue, within discussion, negotiations. If we take the Energy Efficiency Directive, and in particular, we take the Energy Efficiency First Guidelines, some of you might remember these documents produced by the European Commission. One of the first examples of application of energy efficiency first principle is green roofs. Why? Because a green roof on top of buildings helps with energy efficiency. This is especially for cooling, passive cooling methodologies, but also because by treating rainwater where it falls on roof, you reduce through obviously improving the retention and detention of roofs, you reduce the quantity of stormwater to be treated at the level of urban wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah.
This is a lot of money. This is not. This is in the electricity bill of municipalities, because many of the utilities are owned by cities. This is huge. This is a huge percentage of the bill. We could reduce that bill. That is a direct economic benefits for local authorities. Local authorities could reinvest that money into greening our cities, which means making people happier, living better. And it is again, more than 3-4 decades of scientific journal demonstrate the benefits of green infrastructure on mental health, on the quality of life for citizens. So it is a win-win-win-win. I don't know how many wins altogether. Thank you, Mariangela.
Thank you. Dusty and Jan, I saw that you both want to intervene, but there's a comment from one of the participants that I think might be also a good contribution to this debate. And if you allow me, I would like to read it out to you. Jan Rappan says that more than 40% of the European residential buildings were built before the year 2000. And so each of them needs regular maintenance. And this means that these roofs are a net expense to their owner. On the other hand, the causes of urban heat highlands cannot be solved with a single pills. And so green roofs and solar PV roofs are not the only solution. And we need renewable to reduce the energy demand for rainwater harvesting. These are interconnected containers. So on one hand, green roofs and solar roofs together, it's part of a solution, but it cannot be the single pill that solves heat island problems and other issues. And I think you all agreed on this. So I would imagine that the follow-up question is, how do we make this happen so that we're not focusing only on one solution that we know it's working, but it's not the only solution? And this is a question to all of you, but Dusty and Jan, I think you wanted to intervene before, so please go ahead, Dusty. You're muted.
Very, very quickly, I'll answer that. It's the analogy that we use about trees. Right tree in right place. Wrong tree in wrong place is wrong tree in wrong place. So, when you're dealing with a city, some roofs are going to be better for green roofs. Some roofs are actually not going to be very good for green roofs. So we've got to be sophisticated that some very lightweight roofs, which are industrial sheds, that can take solar, might not have green roofs. I'm 30 years, everybody knows that I'm passionate about getting green roofs everywhere, but sometimes it's just not the best place to put them, And so I think we need to have sophisticated thinking about that. Generally, people go, oh, we need lots of solar, so let's do all solar, or we need lots of nature, so let's do all nature. And we've got to be a little bit more sophisticated. But Jan, I'll let you take the stage now.
Yeah, also first to complement to what Luigi said about the financial benefit, what also our manufacturer also of the mounting system also said is that there are cities where you can actually have lower bills for your wastewater if you have a green roof. And that would be a way to create a financial incentive for having green roofs. Which would be important, of course. And on the question on how this can be made possible, so from my perspective, there has to be a policy. This has to be a policy-led solution, just because transitioning and changing the minds of so many people will not be possible in the short time period that is required for these changes. And it is often that these policies are perceived as too strong, over ambitious at the time that they're being discussed. But when they're actually implemented and people got used to them, nobody will ever wonder why they were there. So yeah, I would see here really a strong policy-driven solution. Also because, yeah, let's stop here.
Thank you. Policy-driven solutions, Kieran, my question to you, let's go back to the EPBD and what we just discussed about how necessary is the integration of green infrastructure provisions in the directive. What are your expectations for the trialogues about this, or your hopes maybe, because maybe we don't know yet exactly what you can expect about maintaining and maybe even improving the provisions that are now in the directive about this, because it seems to me that we have to start from somewhere, and why not the EPBD?
Well, I think it's challenging. I think the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, it's a file that people either love or hate. Sometimes we call these things a Marmite issue in politics, that English spread. People either love it or they hate it. So it will be quite daunting and quite challenging to get this directive across the line. My hunch is it would be challenging to increase the ambition at trialogue, because I think the Council of Ministers is not very ambitious on this file, and the Commission, I don't think we're going to see an increase in ambition, and I think we will see attempts to water down what we achieved in Parliament. So I don't want to be hugely optimistic. And I think it's really important that we work at every level of governance, at a European Union level, but at a national, regional, and local level. And Dusty, earlier on, he briefly mentioned the planning system in the UK. I'm trained as an urban planner, and I know that city development plans, or development plans as we call them in the UK and Ireland, they have a hugely important role in facilitating green infrastructure, and particularly permitting that can reduce certain fees or charges if there are green roofs, or if there are blue roofs with photovoltaics, or even white roofs to kind of reduce the urban heat island effect. I think a lot of this can happen at a local government level, and really we want to join up all levels of government in what we do. So that's a long way of saying, I don't think we will increase the ambition significantly through the trialogue process. And I would encourage you all to just put a bit of pressure on your own country to seek higher ambition where you can, or indeed through the Brussels bubble, through the lobbying mechanisms that are available there.
Thank you very much. We only have 5 minutes left, so I wanted to maybe give the opportunity to everyone to add one last thought. So Dusty, I see you're raising your hand. Please go ahead.
A quick point on what Kieran said in terms of London. It wasn't the UK I was referring to. London's government was invented in 2000, so it's a new government for the future. And that's why it's been quite successful. It's not because I'm a Londoner, it's because of that. What I want to end up is it's a question to Kieran, it might be controversial, or to the Commission, is, how does the solar industry, the solar thermal industry, and the green roof industry come together to do innovation? Because I was chatting to Luigi yesterday. There are roofs in Spain that are not being irrigated because they're by the coast and the rain, the sea breeze comes in. If they had solar panels on them, I've calculated they'd probably be making 3 liters of water per panel. The industry at the moment is selling, but it's not got time to actually come together to look at how we can create innovative solutions to meet across the board. That's empirical. It doesn't need research. It needs the industry to come together and collaborate. That's my final point. Yeah.
Thank you, Dusty. Jan, as a representative of the industry, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I can only agree, but to add that we see increasing amount of solutions that combine nature and solar panels. So, for example, on the utility scale solar plants, we have an increasing amount of agrivoltaics, just given the growth expectations that we have to solar panels. We will need so much land that is now either used for agriculture or for nature. So there will be conflicts for land. And so the solar industry really sees the solution of double usage of land. So agrivoltaics, installing solar panel on top of agricultural land. And this is of course the front runner on the big land-based solutions, but there will be an increasing awareness also coming on the building segment. But maybe to accelerate this process, it might make sense that the relevant interest groups come together and start discussing with each other.
Thank you. Kieran, a final point from you?
Yeah, I mean, Dusty's point, how do we get the green and solar to work together? I think Horizon programs can spearhead innovation, as can the new European Bauhaus. But it is a fair point that the Repower EU plan, which came out of the war in Ukraine, said we want solar PV and we want heat pumps. There was nothing in there about green roofs. So I think we have to constantly fight the corner on green roofs. I think we have to make all these points about stormwater drainage reduction, about biodiversity. It is this joined up thinking that I find quite frustrating at the EU level, because I think we are quite siloed. DG Ener, DG Move, DG Klima. To get them all to talk to each other is a real challenge. Yeah. Research projects can help on this, but Dusty, I think you hit the nail on the head. We've got to get everybody to talk to each other, and I think we need to do more of that.
Thank you very much. Luigi, final word from you?
Yeah, thank you, Mariangela. I think the presence of Jan, the presence on this point, the presence of Jan here, the presence of colleagues from solar thermal industry yesterday in Ghent, I think is showing that this dialogue is started. I think there is already. I mean, let's also look at the little achievement that we are having now. So I think my hope is, Jan, that we continue this discussion. You mentioned there's a lot of attention that you are paying to the agrivoltaic agenda. I think it's that kind of thinking that needs to be also brought at a level of urban dimension. I think this is because you are already working on that, and I think it is the urban element that is missing, where there is a huge potential for solar energy deployment. So I hope we can continue along that line. And then the first point for Kieran, I think on your point on the negotiation. So there is a few. I mean. I think this holistic, systemic approach can be helpful in discussions to say, guys, it is happening, it is going on. There is a very interesting also guidelines produced by DG Klima on the adaptation, on the capacity of adaptation of buildings that is full of examples of integration of green infrastructure. So another very important resource for knowledge, for arguments in favor of this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you, our speakers, and to all the participants who sent their question. Apologize to those who did not get an answer to their questions, but I think that was a lively debate as from the perspective of a researcher organization working on building. It was really also eye-opening for us and how our research can actually support this conversation. I think it's really, really important. Now it's 11 o'clock. Our session is ended on time. The next session of the European Green Infrastructure Day starts at 11:15. Participants can stay on Zoom while waiting. And the second session is about greening urban spaces to help restore nature in Europe. Thank you again to all of you for your participation and the lively debate, and have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot.
Bye.
I would like to welcome everyone back to this second session of the European Green Infrastructure Day of 2023. I have here some of the panelists. First, I'd like to present myself very shortly. I am moderating this second session today. Very honored to do this. I am a senior officer for nature-based solutions and biodiversity at ICLEI Europe. And yes, Bettina turned her camera on. We have with us today Bettina. She's the head of unit of Natural Capital and Ecosystems Health, DG Environment. We also have Olli Ojala, a senior ministerial advisor for the Ministry of Environment of Finland. We're also going to have Jutta Paulus from Greens Germany. She's a shadow rapporteur of the nature restoration law, and she's going to join us a little bit later today, like more or less in half an hour, whereas the session is running. We also have here Florian Becker. He's the project coordinator of the Green City Accord at Eurocities. And we're also going to have today here with us Tony Amich. He's a green roof specialist for Sempergreen from Spain. Yes, so with this, I would like to give the word to Bettina and say hi. Bettina, we're going to start with you.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Perfect. So thank you very much for your kind introduction. As you heard, I work for the European Commission, and the topic that we are discussing today is extremely high on our agendas at the moment. So really happy for this timely exchange. As you know, the nature restoration law, which you have already mentioned, Daniela, is sort of the outcome and the consequence of a bigger structure. So not only do we have the European Green Deal, but we also have, as announced in the Green Deal, the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. And in this strategy, we have recognized the importance of addressing the quality of urban ecosystems also. They are actually havens for wildlife, even though you may not expect that at first glance, but for pollinators and birds, cities and their green spaces really provide very important havens. Cities also have many problems that they face because of climate change. So we have heat waves, we have excessive flooding, including, of course, stormwater overflows. We have droughts. And so green spaces in our cities and urban areas help to regulate this, to contribute to adaptation to climate change. And they have also very concrete functions, these green spaces, for our own health as citizens and people living in these cities, for example, air quality, and also water retention and so on. So it is very important to keep our cities as livable and as green as possible. And this is why the biodiversity strategy has set out to improve the situation. We have a very important decline of green spaces in our cities that we have observed over the last decades. And the biodiversity strategy reminds us that we must halt this decline and do whatever we can to improve the situation. So like for other targets of the EU biodiversity strategy, the Commission's proposal for a nature restoration law is setting also targets for urban green spaces in order to halt the loss of biodiversity in our urban spaces and to improve the situation, as I already mentioned. The nature restoration law and its targets builds on existing frameworks, legislation, policies, and so on. And in the same way, the urban part of this proposal is linked not only to all the other ecosystems that are addressed in the proposal, but also to some other initiatives that are out there most of them under the European Green Deal. To mention just one, the Commission has just come forward with a new deal for pollinators. This is our revised strategy for pollinators, and pollinators actually find very important spaces also in our urban areas. Interestingly, the biodiversity strategy and the nature restoration law proposal have set this on path for Europe. But now, since December, we also have the global biodiversity framework. And in there, we equally have a target on urban greening. So like for all the other global targets, the nature restoration law will also be our vehicle in the EU to enable our member states and ourselves as a whole community to reach these global targets that our member states have committed themselves to in Montreal in a very cold setting at the end of last year, where heat waves in our cities were probably thought quite far away. But just to share this with you, I heard on the news this morning that yesterday and today temperatures of up to 40 degrees are expected in some cities in the south of Spain, Murcia, Sevilla, and so on. So it is very clear that the people who are living in these cities, if they have a chance to be in a green space and to get a bit of cooling, they will go for that. And I think every citizen in Europe has maybe not a right, but should benefit from such better quality of life in the cities where they live. So the nature restoration law, as I mentioned, aims to halt the loss of biodiversity in urban systems. It also aims to improve, notably by increasing the green space in cities and by increasing specifically what we call tree canopy cover. Green space in cities, and this is the next very important point, is not necessarily only the parks and other green areas. It is also what we can see behind Tony actually on his background. It is the idea of including green in our built environment. So I know we have specialists on this panel who know much more about green roofs and green walls and all the other options that exist, not only to create these effects and these services that nature can deliver for us also in our cities, but also to really improve to the quality of the built environment. Because if we integrate, for example, rainwater into our water cycles that go into buildings, then we are doing something for energy and water efficiency at the same time. So lots of benefits to be found from urban greening. Maybe to mention also that, of course, this negotiation on the Commission's proposal is now ongoing, and I'm sure that our parliamentarian, Ms. Paulus, will maybe tell us some more about that. But it is also clear that this target on urban greening has raised some questions and comments and also concerns from some member states who feel that A, they may already have a lot of green space, which is of course excellent, and B, that this may limit in some way the ability of cities and regions to do their town and area planning. And now this is not at all the intention of this proposal. This proposal really aims to improve, to keep what we have and to improve it. But in the particular case of cities, the proposal doesn't say you need to keep your parks where they are. It just means you need to keep green in the city, but this doesn't prevent you from further developing your city. What it wants us to do is, when we further develop our cities, to do it greener, as I mentioned, either by renovating existing infrastructure and buildings to integrate these green elements, or by constructing from scratch, but in a way where there is a lot of green elements integrated. Also, a few more trees to line our streets would really be pleasant everywhere. So there is plenty of opportunities that do not prevent further town planning. We know that in several member states in the EU, there is an urgent need for more housing, and those citizens should also benefit then from the best possible quality of life that they can have. So maybe to end on two more points. One is that I was mentioning water efficiency and energy efficiency. There are also very clever ways of combining green roofs, for example, with energy production, because I have learned recently that actually solar panels work extremely well on green roofs, because, as I was told, then the cooling capacities of this green roof also help to cool the system that runs the solar panels. So many win-win possibilities in urban greening to be found. And a final word, there are plenty of opportunities also from EU funds to help our cities, regions, and member states fund such greener options for city. There is, of course, the regional funds that are specifically also for urban development. There's also the Horizon Europe program, and in particular, there are two missions on the horizon that I would like to mention. One is the mission on cities, that's an obvious one, but there's also the mission on adaptation. And as part of the mission on adaptation, there's also the aim to make, I think, 100 cities more capable of dealing with climate adaptation. And this is especially and particularly what we are trying to discuss today. So happy to have been able to give you these first thoughts, and really looking forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bettina. I think this was really, really interesting to hear. And I mean, the new restoration law, the nature restoration law is, very, very important. Not only for us working in the field of nature-based solutions and climate adaptation, but also I think for many people that don't know yet how important it is, like for the citizens themselves. Maybe they're not tuned in knowing that this nature restoration law exists, but for sure they will they will really notice the effects of this law when it really starts rolling and the cities start really protecting more and more green areas and maybe making space for new ones. Yes, I have some questions here for you. I think you touched upon most of them, and maybe only one before we go to the next panelist that I would like to ask you. You mentioned a little bit the funding lines, right, for this, to make this possible. So you mentioned Horizon Europe, that is doing a lot of research in the field. You mentioned also some regional funds. I was just wondering, are there any other ways that, for example, you can engage the wider public into, I don't know, is the Commission foreseeing something related to crowdsourcing, or I don't know, investment from investors for greening, like a little bit more creative part that is not the usual funding lines that we have. Just to talk a little bit about that, if we can bring new actors into the investment arena, and that we don't only relate in public, but the public hand, and maybe the private sector can jump in as well.
Thank you so much. Very happy that you mentioned this, because from the Commission we of course always asked first how much money could the EU funds make available. So this is indeed what I have mentioned. Also because, as you mentioned, the general awareness of the existence of these funds is maybe not yet ideal. So a lot of the potential from the EU funds are not reaped yet by our member states, regions, and cities. This is not only true for urban greening, but for generally biodiversity funding, because a lot is available already and unfortunately not necessarily programmed everywhere and always to the best capacity. But I think you make a very important point, because EU funds and public funds can only get us so far. They can be very good catalysts to bring together actors, but the real big funding challenge is to get more private investments. And here, urban greening, I think, is potentially in a better situation than some other parts of biodiversity funding, because we are here talking about new technological and smart solutions. There's a lot of research involved, but there is also a market, because we are talking about housing and infrastructure and so on. So while we are trying to make possible services produced by nature in the built environment, there is also a clear business element that is probably more tangible than when we talk about restoring our rivers or our other habitats, where the benefits are huge, but the returns on investment, we are often told, are not short-term and not so clearly to be found. So I think in urban greening, we have a really big playground where we can make a lot of progress. And we have actually also from the Commission side come forward with some guidelines on urban greening and how member states can produce these urban greening plans that I haven't yet mentioned, that are suggested in the biodiversity strategy that our cities and towns should set up for themselves, because it will help them in this big project. And of course, bringing it back to the nature restoration law, these plans can then be integrated fully into the future national restoration plans, because it's very clear that measures taken in cities are crucial for biodiversity and our ecosystems at large.
Thanks so much for this, Bettina. Yes, I guess we can hear a bit from Olli. Olli might bring us another perspective, and we want to have a good discussion here today. So Olli, so he's working for advising the Ministry of Environment of Finland, and he's a senior in his position, and he would also tell us a little bit about the Finnish position here and how they see the new restoration law.
Okay, good. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to present the Northern European view to restoration. Like Daniela told, I'm a senior ministerial advisor in the Ministry of Environment in Finland, and I'm in charge of EU biodiversity policy. And lately, I've been very much engaged with the EU nature restoration law. And there, the rest of these few lines I'm going to say relate to partly how we see the EU nature restoration law, but definitely it's a misunderstanding if and when we have been seen as negative towards the Article 6 of the EU nature restoration law. We are very much analyzing the details and implementability of the article, and therefore we've been quite active in this article. But our general view is very positive. And before I go to those, I can't help mentioning that I'm calling from Lahti. That was the 2021 Green Capital of the Europe. And this year was a great chance for me and other citizens of Lahti to have a look at the different types of activities a municipality can do for sustainability. And now to the 3 points I have. First of all, urban environments are important and must be a part of every future biodiversity strategy and action plan, just like it is an important part of the EU nature restoration law. So I have 3 points, and first one is that when and as we want to restore ecosystems, there's absolutely no way to justify leaving urban ecosystems out, especially as these are the environments where the humans have most profound impact on natural ecosystems. The second point is relatively ecological based, namely substituting the loss of biodiversity in rich agroecosystems is very much possible in urban environments. There are many threatened biotopes, habitat types in agroecosystems that haven't been helped by the common agricultural policy, and there's plenty of room for actions in urban environments to help, especially those habitats and species dependent on those habitat types that are threatened in their original environment. And then the third interesting option, third interesting point is that the urban environments are the places where the population mostly gets into contact with nature, or does not if the city they live in does not allow it. And from the point of view of root causes or indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, it is absolutely important that the inhabitants get into contact with nature. This builds their personal relationship with nature and builds their motivation to conserve and restore nature. And there's an interesting theory that getting contact with nature with your different senses helps building empathy towards other species and keeps the motivation up. In urban environments, it's also possible to engage inhabitants to bigger and smaller actions in huge numbers, so that it builds hope, maintains hope and motivation to act for nature. So these all actually are linked to the IPBES global assessment from 2019 that said that halting biodiversity loss is possible, but on top of the traditional nature conservation measures, we need to tackle also the root causes or indirect drivers of biodiversity loss. This means basically the values and behaviors of people, and by getting also the city dwellers into contact with the nature, we can influence their values, their behaviors, and hopefully, and I believe we can change this to better and support the halting of biodiversity loss. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie, so much for making this very positive intervention here, and also saying that we need really more than just conservation measures and methodologies. We really need to get the buy-in of the resident. So my question here to you goes in this sense, actually, like in terms of gaining, the awareness and the buy-in from residents, from cities. Can you comment a little bit more? Do you know any example maybe in Finland in that sense, in the Finnish experience, and getting more participation, more engagement? And of course, just reacting a bit to the questions and answers that I was reading now, we're not talking only about green roofs and green walls, and as Bettina said, also not only about parks, I mean, I use a lot the term nature-based solutions, but we are talking about nature in cities. So it's very broadly understood, and it has a really wide range. The types of natural features that we're talking about in the session. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And what I was saying was not actually even referring that much to green roofs and green walls, as I feel that for the inhabitants of cities, the let's say lawns that are mostly lawns at the moment, those can be transformed to biodiverse open habitat types that actually support those habitats and species that are threatened in their original environment. And once you have the plant richness, you will get insects, butterflies, and that's something for the visual sense of the inhabitants. Once you get insects, you get also birds, and that's for your hearing as well, something. And then you don't need to be a specialist to start feeling and building like personal a relationship with nature, and in that ways I would answer. Thank you.
This is perfect, Ollie. I just want to comment one thing. There's one project from the city of Edinburgh, which is very interesting. I know that the population back in times, I'm talking about 8 or 10 years ago, they were complaining about, oh, but the municipality is not cutting and trimming the lawns. It looks messy and uncontrolled, you know. There was a little bit like this mistrust, and then they did a very, very strong awareness raising campaign about the richness in these biodiversity wildflowers lawns. And today it's really well understood by the citizens of the city that it is better to have a lawn with many, many, many different flowers and insects and butterflies and pollinators than to have a, green desert, if you will. So this changed a lot. The whole understanding of biodiversity within the city of Edinburgh. Yes, I just got a message that Jutta is not yet in. So I would like to pass the word to our next panelist so that we can continue the discussion, to Florian. Florian is the project coordinator of the Green City Accord, and he's also working for Eurocities. And he can tell us a little bit about what the Green City Accord is and what this movement of European mayors is doing.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for the introduction. So my name is Florian. I'm part of the environment team at Eurocities and the project coordinator for the Green City Accord, which is DG Environment's long-term initiative running at least until 2030, which has been launched 2.5 years ago. So the network has been growing to right now 104 cities among 18 member states. And the conception behind the Green City Accord is that each signatory city commits to advance on 5 key environmental issues. So these are clean air, noise, water management, circular waste economy, and biodiversity. When it comes to biodiversity, so far that has been the area where there has been the least legal framework around the actions the cities are supposed to do. So we very much welcome the proposed nature restoration law. And we're happy to see that so each of the areas, such as biodiversity, has 3 indicators where we like to measure progress, which has been done by cities then. And we also cover the percentage of tree canopy cover in the city boundaries, which is similar to the one proposed in the nature restoration law. From the meetings we have with our network, we also know that biodiversity is the most pressing issue among the 5 areas for many of our cities. And within the Green City Accord, we basically we have quite a wide geographical spread among Europe, and we recognize that cities start at a different level. We have cities where there's lots of green areas, and there are cities where there's none or very limited areas. And therefore, we also, within the Green City Accord, we basically offer cities the flexibility to basically establish a baseline scenario, which each city has to submit 2 years after admission. So we're basically in the process right now, and we hope to have the first batch of those baseline reports by the end of the year, and then basically set targets for the upcoming 3 years. And so far, what we've been doing, we are providing technical assistance for each of the areas. We direct the network to the different funding opportunities which have been mentioned before, and we also collected and shared best practices. We have quite some good examples. For example, the Spanish city of Vitoria-Gasteiz has developed quite an extensive plan on renaturation of simply unused land within the city boundaries. And the city of Tallinn, for example, has built this pollinator highway, which I think is also an issue which is quite important when it comes to green roofs. And we will hear a bit more. Yeah.
Thanks so much for this intervention, Florian. I think it's also like quite reassuring to know that 104 cities are committing, to these areas of for the environment, and that I know quite a bit about the Green City Accord, and I know that the indicators they have these 3, let's say, mandatory indicators, but they also are very encouraged to go for more indicators that they feel are important in their context, so that they can choose some alternative ones or additional indicators if they want. And I guess in some years from now, we're going to see this comparison of the baseline and what has been achieved. And I guess this goes very much like a marriage with the nature restoration law and the urban greening plans that Bettina has mentioned, that these cities are already being front runners in a way because they're already committing, right, to these indicators. The question that I have to you is, I guess the Green City Accord is very much focusing on cities and the urban dimension of the nature restoration law. Let's see, we're seeing the perspective of cities here a lot with this initiative. Do you think that the proposal of the Commission could be improved, or should still be improved, or should be more ambitious, or what is your take from your experience?
I think overall it's great to have this goal of having no net loss by 2030. But then again, coming to our network and also towards Olli, we have 6 Finnish cities in the Green City Accord, among them Lahti, and we know that many of our Finnish cities are really, really green. And then, of course, when it comes to development of cities, it's a bit a question about where do we draw the border? Do we take the city limits? Do we take a metropolitan area? And I think we're very much in favor of having a certain level of flexibility. So we would welcome if member states can actually kind of define the goals, and which then could also take into account the existing green spaces in cities that are already there. And on top of that, I mean, the discussion of green roofs and green walls is very important, because we all know there's need for more habitation spaces in a lot of cities, and of course that is a way to mitigate also the loss of potential green space.
Yes, Florian, I guess you touched there in a point, like in cities that are already quite green, as many in Northern Europe. Of course, I guess the questions related to how to deal with the greening related to buildings, related to the construction sector, becomes very relevant. And I guess that these northern cities can show a little bit the way, you know, okay, I'm a green city, I already did kind of my job, but I can do more. How can I, in new settlements or new houses being built, or even in existing buildings, transform the environment in a way that it gets more green? So here is space for a lot of creativity and research, of course, through Horizon Europe, but also for, I would say, entrepreneurship. So I know I'm involved in, I think, 10 or 11 NBS Horizon projects, and we see that many enterprises are bringing this, you know, new, as Bettina also said, new technologies, new ways to green. That is not only about parks, it's about technology as well. Being smart about sensors, understanding soil, and understanding you know, how water can be intercepted by buildings, and what they can do even for wastewater. We have a project that is really focusing on wastewater via nature-based solutions. So instead of pipes, having NBS, so they are really studying how you can use the facade of a building to clean the wastewater produced by the building. You know, so very, very interesting solutions that are coming up. So yeah, so thank you for this. Yes, and with this, I think Jutta is still not here. Yes, Jutta is here. So Jutta, I would call you to the board. So Jutta Paulus is the shadow rapporteur on the nature restoration law that we're talking a lot about today. And I would like to give her the word for her intervention.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you in the first place for organizing this meeting and this exchange, because I think it's really very important that these issues are discussed, even if the legislation is not ready to be passed, of course, because we're still negotiating in Parliament, Council is still negotiating on their part, and then the trilogues, of course, will be coming up. As to urban ecosystems, I think it is something that cannot be stressed too much, that we really need to look at those ecosystems also, and not only look at the rural areas, because first of all, so many people live in cities. Second, biodiversity cannot be only saved in the countryside, because we know that a lot of insect pollinators, even small mammals, are thriving more in cities than in the countryside nowadays, because there has been a huge transformation in the way we do agriculture as compared to the, let's say, not so much mechanized and chemicized way, which was done until, let's say, the 1950s. So basically, cities play an increasing role also, of course, because cities have been growing a lot over the last 100 years, looking at how much space they take up as compared to not so long ago. I think the Commission has already put forward some good things on green spaces in the cities. We are inclined to add in our approach to the nature restoration law also the blue spaces, which have been a bit overlooked in the Commission's approach. But we know that the blue spaces in cities have not only a role for biodiversity, but also for climate adaptation. They are giving cool places. They can, if restored and designed properly, they can help us mitigate the impact of climate change, because they can take up water in the event of heavy rainfalls. It is proven, the European Environment Agency has great data on that people that are living in the surroundings of green and blue spaces are in much better health, simply by having a favorable environment. And there, I think we should, as legislators, put forward demands to make sure that people have access equally, because usually it is the, let's say, not so rich neighborhoods where less restoration is being done, where less green, less blue is put in the surroundings of people. But on the other hand, those are the people that are usually even more exposed to pollution, more exposed to not so clean air. So I think these are the places where we should act first. As to the things which I heard just in the last few minutes when I was getting online, sorry for being late, but we had several committee meetings with votes where, of course, I had to attend. It is totally right that we have to take a balanced approach. I know about the situation in Finland and other Scandinavian countries where the borders of the municipalities are quite different from the borders in Central Europe, where if you have a city where 90% of the land is forest anyway, it would be a bit difficult to increase the tree canopy cover by another 10%. So I think it would be appropriate to put in some possibilities there for member states to accommodate to the current situation, but we should not decrease the overall targets, and we should make sure that we are really doing targeted approaches. So if you have a city where you have, like I said, 90% forest around the city, it's not such a good idea to put them under the same demands as a city where this is not the case. So, and I also would want to highlight that we should not only look at trees, we should also look at other possibilities to introduce green, to introduce biodiversity in our cities, all the more so, which is something which I know from my former position in Germany, with people renovating their homes due to energy efficiency issues. Often small habitats for mammals, for birds get lost, because of course they want to close their roofs, they want to make sure that no more energy is escaping through crevices, is escaping through little holes. But then we have to make sure that we create more habitats for birds and small mammals to nest and to reproduce after doing or while doing the renovation. And there are already great examples on how to work on this. And we should make sure that when building new buildings, new dwellings for people, we should already think of how can we introduce green infrastructure, blue infrastructure at the same time. And usually this is a double effect, of course, enhancing biodiversity, but also it is good for people's well-being, and those houses usually even get a higher price. They have a higher value because people say, hey, it's beautiful here. There are beautiful surroundings. I have some shade in summer. I can sit next to a little pond. My kids can play outside, even if it's not a single family home, but especially all the more so if you have a whole quarter that's being designed, it is of crucial importance to already design green and blue infrastructure when building such quarters. There are great examples all over Europe. For example, I visited Copenhagen 2 years ago, where a whole new quarter was planned, and it was actually right already in the planning. How can we make sure that everyone has access to space for recreation, for children to play, but also for nature to be part of our living? In the European Parliament, in the negotiations, we have a quite broad agreement that we should do more on green and blue infrastructure in urban ecosystems. This is not contentious, so I'm looking forward to agreeing on quite ambitious compromises in order to be able to have green and blue infrastructure in all European cities.
This is very, very encouraging, Jutta. Thanks so much for this intervention. A question going a little bit deeper on, because it interests me a lot, what we can do with the new residential areas, or the new, business areas, the development areas in cities. I know that the nature restoration law is kind of like, of course, giving this flexibility that the member states and the cities, they should design their own plans, and to be able to see in their own context how that can roll out. But I'm just thinking about some lines. What, in your opinion, could be a way to, to ensure, and here I may be talking even about a bit of the regulatory part of things, that new developers, that they have to follow certain criteria to not forget the biodiversity part, or just not arrive in a place and destroy things that are already there just to put some buildings up.
I think this would be much too detailed to put into a regulation, because a regulation is not to be translated into national law. A regulation is for all European member states. So basically what this regulation is doing, they say we have some criteria which we set forth in the regulation, and the member states in their restoration plans have to show that they will reach those targets. So I would be very careful, because also the national governance is so heterogeneous across Europe. In Germany, we have the federal level, the regional governments, and then the municipalities, and the subsidiarity principle applies in Germany in that way. In other member states, like in France, it's much different. Or in Poland, it's even more different. So I think those details should not be put in the regulation, but I think a good idea would be to have the Commission develop guidelines for member states, how to ensure that development is done in a sustainable way. And also, I think the Covenant of Mayors is a wonderful place where mayors who are really in charge of how their cities, how their municipalities develop, could exchange good examples. How could we proceed? In Germany, we have this legal possibility of having a, how do you call it? It's so, you always have to apply for an authorization when you want to build something, right? But there is also the possibility to have a contract between the municipality and the developer, regardless of who is at the end of the day the owner of the buildings or whatever is being built. You can have a contract with a developer where the developer has to oblige to certain principles. And if he or she doesn't do so well, the city can say, okay, I'll find someone else who's willing to do it. And this is sometimes even better than having it in the authorization for the building, simply because if you have a contract with both sides have signed, it's very difficult to challenge that in a court ruling, because the court would say, well, why did you sign it in the first place, right? Whereas with an authorization, it's always a bit like, okay, are they overstepping their possibilities in making the developer do something or not? So I think there are examples for that. And I think the important thing is also that citizens themselves approach their municipalities, their mayors, their local representatives saying, we demand a greener city, we demand a more healthy city. We want to have a livable city where everyone can feel well and not some are pushed away to the dirty areas and the other one enjoy a wonderful park. That's not the way we want to proceed. So we have to be active on all areas. And I will surely ask the Commission whether they plan to produce some guidelines on this green and blue infrastructure, because there's so much data we can build on, we can use. The European Environment Agency has also done great work on gathering that data from different European regions and showing how it can all play together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jutta. Yeah, Bettina, I wanted to actually think back to you in case you want to comment on that. And then I would like to read some of the questions. We have very nice questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much. Not much to add from my perspective, actually, maybe to mention that in terms of regulation, in our member states, we already have excellent examples, because in both France and Germany, if I'm rightly informed, there is already legislation that deals with issues such as soil sealing in cities and so on. So indeed, as Ms. Paulus has just said, this cannot go into a regulation. In the regulation, we can only set the targets, and then anything that from the Commission side we can do to facilitate the implementation, we are of course happy to look into that. As I already mentioned, that we have these guidelines on how to do urban development plans to help cities who wish to do those under the biodiversity strategy to get a head start. By the way, these plans are not obligatory from the nature restoration law side. It is really something that cities will do on their own initiative. I was wondering whether maybe Tony has some good advice on regulatory aspects concerning building green, because I understand he's active in that area. So maybe he's better placed to answer that question also.
Yes. Oh, Tony, I want to actually introduce you before we go to the questions. And you can, because Tony is a specialist on green roofs, and he actually has an intervention here as well. And he can tell us a little bit about the work that they are doing. He's from Sempergreen. Tony, the floor is yours.
Yeah, regarding the regulation, I think is very different in each country, especially here in our country. Yeah, I think that the public awareness is very favorable, but sometimes lacks the means to act. No, that in many countries the application of the green infrastructure construction solutions is not as well implemented as in some Northern European countries. That our experience, therefore, is that the governmental authorities have to take the initiative. No. I think the administration can assume the risk that companies will not take, since the capital is more afraid to risk. Then the administration must apply these measures in order to be able to legislate and to create regulations. I don't know if I have time, but maybe a clear example of the by the administration that ends becoming an example and then allows constructive criteria to be established is the Barcelona Green Roof Tender. Over the last 2 years, the City Council has partly funded 10 green roof projects. Now in the city of Barcelona, we already have 20 green roofs of many different types, monitored by the municipality. Yeah, these projects spread throughout the city for the enjoyment of the whole community and of very different types, from extensive green roofs to intensive green roof, real gardens on the roof of some buildings, urban gardens or islands of biodiversity. There are absolutely spectacular natural ecosystems have been created. Then in this way, the city has an extensive catalog of green roofs with all the technical, design and maintenance characteristics. They can serve as a model for future successful projects. This is just one proposal that can be made by the local administration and could be repeated in other cities. I don't know, but I think it's something to start to regulate, and especially here in our countries in the south, that sometimes we are not in the same level as in the northern European countries.
Tony, this is great. Thank you for raising that example. I think it is really a good example for many countries, and actually even the northern ones in terms of governance, how you have been doing that. I have a question to you, Tony. How the industry, considering green roof experts and local authorities, can work even more together to achieve these kind of green urban areas. I mean, you mentioned this, that you can put out catalogs, but are there other ways that you have in your profession been sensitized, or some ideas that you have, some positive examples?
I will come back to my city, Barcelona. I'm very proud of my city, and of course, and you know, maybe another idea, because I think it's better to explain with some examples. And another example is also in my city, in Barcelona, is that probably, how can I explain? Probably many of you are familiar with the image of the city, you know, this set of perfectly aligned blocks and squares, the famous Eixample in Barcelona. But when almost 200 years ago, the Catalan engineer Ildefons Cerdà designed this grid to deal with the ground of the city, many of these blocks were green. Some squares were green, and part of the blocks were half building, half garden. Also, the interior of the islands were green. No? Cerdà wants to bring the benefits to the countryside to the city. That did not happen, of course. But in 2020, the Barcelona City Council started the Green Infrastructure and Biodiversity Plan. Then, by creating green corridors, the City Council wants to connect these green spaces outside the city. You know, in Barcelona, you have the mountain, the sea, and two rivers in the north and the south. And he wants to connect these green spaces and the green spaces within the city, which at the moment are often isolated spots. Then the metropolitan area of Barcelona bears the potential to create more than 700 kilometers of green corridors, which will link these different areas of the city. They look like a major green arteries, which will help keep Barcelona alive.
Yes, I think you touched upon the very important point also for the nature restoration law, Tony, which is this stitching of the urban with the peri-urban, with the metropolitan areas. So really not thinking about only the city perimeter. And here we have again the examples, as Jutta mentioned, some of the cities in Finland where the understanding of perimeter is a different one. But I guess this, you know, thinking about how these corridors can be connected. Connectivity is a very important point for biodiversity, for sure. We don't have much time. Can we just read one session? I'm just hearing here from the organizer. Can we read one question from the Q&A? Yep. Okay, so I have one question. This one goes to the Commission. So the commitment of DG Environment on this agenda is great. It is possible to imagine moving forward a more structured dialogue and interaction among the DGs. So with DG Energy, with DG Regio, DG Research, DG Klima. So can you comment a little bit on that, maybe, Bettina, on this, you know, better interlinkages between the DGs to the extent of creating an office or a platform where you can have regular dialogue among EU Commission colleagues to advance this agenda in a more holistic way?
Thank you very much. So very happy to give you a little bit of an inside view of our administration. So actually, the biodiversity agenda is extremely cross-cutting. And if you look at the biodiversity strategy itself, there is plenty of actions, and many of them are actually administratively not for DG Environment. So already we work together with most DGs, Directorate Generals in the Commission, for those who maybe not know this jargon. And this cooperation is excellent. We meet regularly. We have a so-called inter-service group where we come together and we discuss hot topics of the day. We also link up with our stakeholders. Some of you may know that we just had a meeting of the EU Biodiversity Platform earlier this week. And of course, in this, also our colleagues from other Directorate Generals are come and are regular guests, not even guests, but members. And we work together like that. I also wanted to mention again the Global Biodiversity Framework, because this has brought a whole new dimension. Many of those targets on biodiversity, including the urban one that I mentioned in the beginning, require cooperation, of course, then also with all the services inside the Commission and in the other institutions that deal with external policies. So yes, we are a tight-knit community, but we are quite large and happy to enlarge further. Maybe just one more word, because I think this was also a bit implied in this question. The Commission itself as an owner of buildings is also trying to work. So myself, we have moved into new offices, which is actually a refurbished former office close to the Schumann Park and the Saint-Contenaire, it's called. And inside the building, there's green spaces integrated also, and there's even a little gardening initiative where we, the staff, can plant little pots and also little bigger spaces in the back of the building. So I think that the Commission is also trying to live what it preaches. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Bettina. And I would like to put in a last question before we close the session, because I think it's a very important point that we didn't touch that much. I'm not sure to whom asked this question, so I'll leave it to one of the speakers to just raise their hands and then they can jump in. How do you see the role of green spaces in resilience and addressing inequalities leading to justice inequalities? Like, how can we do all the work that we're doing also with the nature restoration law, but addressing injustice issues or access to green? Does anybody want to touch upon that topic? Let me just see if I can see all the speakers. I have a very small screen today. Ollie, do you want to say some words on that, or Florian?
Well, I was trying to search the hand to raise, so I have some idea, but I think especially the urban environments play a crucial role in tackling the injustices and more than in other environments. I would say in urban environments you can choose to locate the measures so that the social injustice inequalities are considered.
Perfect. That's the place for us to discuss these kinds of problems and to solve them, right? Okay. With that, Flo, if you want to say something. Tony, I see your hand. Thank you. Yes, Tony, please come in.
Yes, just let me add something from my point of view. Probably the most important initiative that should be implemented is the dissemination of these projects that we are talking today. Because when we apply these green measures, when we create these corridors, these green corridors that connect the gardens, the parks in our cities, I think it's necessary for the citizens to know what is happening around them. Because only through the knowledge we can improve our perception. What I want to say is, when you know the trees in the street around your house, when you know the birds that live there, when you know the names of these trees, of these birds, then you create an emotional bond with them. Then nature becomes part of your urban ecosystem. And the gardens, the green walls, my activity, the green roof, all these spaces for biodiversity become a common good. It's a social service. It's important for citizens as schools, as hospitals can be. I think it's very important. Sorry.
No, perfect, Tony. I think that's I'm gonna borrow your what you said about the common God and the common God, the common good of the green in the city. So thank you for bringing that. I have unfortunately to close the session, but I would like to thank you very much for the panelists and for discussing today this very important topic that we really wish that the nature restoration laws flies and bring all the cities, and that we have a much greener Europe. And thinking about the global biodiversity framework, that we can show that European member states are really willing to do the best they can to achieve the targets. Thank you.
Just to note everyone, the next session, session 3 of the event, Permeable Cities for Better Water Management, Resilience and Climate Adaptation, is at 2 p.m. We will end the session, but you can use the same link to join at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.